Hey, what's up? It's another episode. My name is Rob. This is Film Streak. I'm watching new movies, talking about them to you. Maybe you care, maybe you don't. I don't know. For me, it's just something I do anyway. So why not share it with you folks? Now, the idea is, of course, that some of these movies are brand new. Some of them are not. In this episode, I did want to get to a few new movies that I've seen that actually, I didn't even plan it this way, but they kind of follow a very similar pattern. They're certainly in the same genre, I guess you could say, and yet very different. And also by some very interesting filmmakers, I think, personally, you know? The first one is The Beekeeper, and this is a film by director David Ayer, stars Jason Statham, and I couldn't help but compare this or draw at least some sort of similarity to the John Wick franchise, that type of film, the secret, retired hitman, assassin, whatever, in hiding, who's drawn out because of some tragedy, some incident that happened, and now he's looking to get back at somebody. He's looking to get in the game again. This one is just the weirdest mix of some of these tropes and this genre in general. You know, the main thing being that Jason Statham, his character here, is going after some online scammers, which is not an unusual thing. But let me fix my microphone because it's falling. It's not an unusual thing, these online scammers, but, you know, a lot of what I've seen, like, have you ever looked up on YouTube? There's this YouTuber, his name is Jim Browning, and he does these videos where he basically exposes and kind of toys with a lot of these scammers that use like phishing attacks and fake customer support service hotlines to trick usually a lot of elderly people, but people in general, just trick them into giving them money or buying gift cards and redeeming that as a way to pay for a service or whatever. And, you know, that's one way of doing it. This story about these online scammers, it seems way more fancy and way more sophisticated than I think it actually is. The fact that you have such an operation and such a not only high-tech operation, but like a well-oiled machine behind it all, I think that's where we get into fantasy land, because this thing is certainly a real thing that happens, but it being this organized, I don't feel like that's the case. Now, I guess that's Hollywood or some level of creative license trying to make this into more of a real villain that our main character can go after. And so this film, I feel like it uses that premise, but it just really blows it out of proportion. And it just gives Jason Statham a reason to just go nuts on all of these bad guys. But this whole thing of this secret society of the beekeepers and the contract killer sort of operatives, I felt like that was a really shaky knockoff of some other things that we've seen before. That's not to say, well, you know what, actually, even the action itself, the stunts, the choreography of things, the editing of some of these things, it doesn't really, I don't know, it just doesn't have like a flow to it. It doesn't feel very, I mean, you think of where the game has gone in terms of the John Wick franchise, in terms of, I don't know, even the Mission Impossible, you know, all of these bigger franchises that have really perfected and pushed to the next level some of this type of filmmaking. This one really, it just feels kind of subpar, you know? And I say all of this about this film to say that that's kind of a bummer. I mean, I feel bad for David Ayer because I like his types of films. I like his approach to filmmaking from what I've seen in his interviews and some of the films that he's done, I feel like there's a real like a power and an energy and a strength to his filmmaking. But a film like this, I don't know, man. It feels. I don't know if it really is, but it feels a little phoned in. And that's too bad. I like to see people the work that I appreciate. I like to see them do good work and really knock them out of the park. And this one, I just think, after the whole thing with the Suicide Squad and whatever that turned out to be, I felt like, well, this is going to be a film that will help put him back on track and maybe be a return to his type of storytelling. I think some of his strengths as a filmmaker, as a writer, as just an artist, are dealing with real, authentic characters and situations. And a lot of his earlier films had to do with either crime or police or, gang type of stories and the societies around those groups. And here, we get traces of that. But again, we're so far off into the weeds of this fictional secret society and all of the machinations behind it. I don't know. I didn't really enjoy it. This is at its core a revenge story. And it's a little convoluted. It's kind of like a revenge for who exactly and for what, but that is what it is at its core. And so I said, oh, well, that's interesting because the next film that I saw right after this was Monkey Man, which I kind of knew based on a trailer and based on a couple of things I'd read that is essentially what this story is too. But, the interesting thing about this film is that this is a directorial debut from Dev Patel, who is also the actor, the star of the film. And it occurred to me, it's like, well, wait a minute. Here's somebody who has been in movies for a long time now. If you go all the way back to Slumdog Millionaire, he's done some great work in films throughout the years. I really liked Lion. If I think back, I don't remember enjoying The Green Knight. I honestly don't remember much of it to begin with. But I do know that he's done some really solid work. And sometimes it's very subtle and you kind of forget that he's in some things. But I think a lot of times he is the one that kind of holds things together. He's like the heart of a film. Even something like Chappie, which, I feel like that was a while back and I feel like it really flew under the radar. But he is the one that is the soul of that film and grounds it a little bit emotionally. And so here, seeing this was interesting to see his full vision become reality. And it seems partially like based in like legend or mythology, but also updated for today's time, but also intertwining that with real commentary about the state of things in that part of the world. If you're talking about the different classes, you're talking about the poverty, you're talking about just the power dynamic between the rich and the poor in India, this film really does tackle that. And it's strange because it's not that kind of film. It's not a drama. It is like an action thriller. It's a revenge story. But it's got a lot of depth to it. And especially, there's a moment in the film, I guess halfway through or somewhere in the middle, where he really gets served. This guy, he goes in to take on the bad guys and he gets knocked back. And he has to just retreat, regroup, and find a new approach. And it's a really interesting turn to take in a story like this because it's one of those where you kind of feel like once the action starts, it's like, okay, we're just going now. This thing is just, we're going to ride it to the end. But this film stops and it backs up and it shows us like this character, even though he's got the right idea and he thinks he can be successful, he maybe is coming at it for the wrong reason. And he needs to maybe examine that and look deeper and find another gear, you know? And so then when we do pick back up and he does come back to really get his moves on and show these bad guys what's up, then it really goes to 11. You know, this film, it seems inspired by some other films like John Wick, like The Raid, you know, that style of filmmaking of this just no holds barred, just brutal, graphic action, stunts, fight choreography. And it's one of those that if this film had come out maybe 5 to 10 years ago, I feel like we'd be saying Dev Patel, he's not just on another level. He's like surpassed anything that an actor director has done. And not to say this isn't a good film. I liked it. I really enjoyed it. I like the look at different cultures and this part of the world and really getting a real ground level view of what this struggle is like and a little bit of the fantasy of how it could be different, right? I think that's important. I mean, if you're going to tell a story and you're going to tell a story about a specific way of life or culture or just another part of the world, like don't tell me from the bird's eye view, because I can kind of get that just reading and learning through history and so on. Give me what it's like on the ground as a person living day to day and their real struggle. And I think this film kind of does that, you know, but it also gives us the other side of it. It gives us the what if I could version of it, which is fun. I mean, it does not wince at some of the violence. It goes all in. But I think that's where we get that dynamic. You know, we really get a film that shows us all different aspects of it. So I really enjoyed it. You know, I thought it was inventive in some ways. In others, I feel like, well, I've kind of seen some stuff like this before, but not in this context. So in that respect, it makes me just want to see more of what Dev Patel will do. I mean, not just as an actor, but as a filmmaker now. And that's another part of this film, is that its story to kind of making its way to the world was being turned down by the studio. And Jordan Peele, who's also an actor and a writer and director, who has made some real roads into genre filmmaking outside of his previously known career as a comedic actor and a performer. He's the one that picked this up and said, hey, this guy, you know him for this, but he's on something else now. And everybody's got to see this. And so he's the one that picked it up with Monkey Paw, his production studio, and brought it out to the world. And that's a big move, man. That's a powerful statement to get behind a film and let everybody see it. So again, I'm excited. I'm excited to see what Dev Patel will do next in any regard. And so those two films down, I said, all right, what else is new that I just hadn't gotten around to that maybe kind of matches up with some of these? And that was a film that I wanted to see last holiday season around the time of Christmas, because I thought this would fit in. I mean, the title and a lot of the marketing for Silent Night really made it seem like it is one of these kind of Christmas action thriller films. It's not a Christmas themed or Christmas related film. It doesn't really have much to do with the holiday itself. So I'm glad I kind of put it off and I finally got around to seeing it now, because here's the thing, for whatever it's not, it is something else. And if you haven't heard this film, it's an interesting one. It is a little bit of a gimmick, but I think there's a good reason why. And yet, I don't know if it's entirely successful, you know? This is, for 2023, this is John Woo, his return, is essentially his return to American filmmaking. And, you know, he did some pretty substantial, pretty significant films in, what was that, like the mid-90s, where you had stuff like Hard Target, you had Face Off, Broken Arrow, and I think he might have done one or two others a little bit after that. But before those films, he was primarily known as a director in Asia and was Hong Kong, and worked with Chow Yun-fat, Hard Boiled, The Killer, all those movies that really redefined action filmmaking, especially with the gunplay and the choreography, his use of slow motion, his use of doves. I mean, it kind of became a parody at some point, especially with Mission Impossible 2. I thought, all right, well, he's kind of repeating himself and he's kind of cannibalizing his own style. And yet, here is where he's able to come back and really show us something different. And with all that said, this film stars Joel Kinnaman as a father who we really I don't know if we really get a lot of history on, but his family is caught in the crossfire of like a gang shootout. His son gets killed. He gets shot in the throat. And for about the first, 30 or 40 minutes of this film, it's him healing and recovering from that incident and then trying to figure out like who was behind it and what can he do about it? What can the police do about it? What recourse does he have for the loss of his son and for his own injuries? And there's a part of this film that you think, oh, well, he doesn't have a voice because he's shot in the throat, so he can't talk. And yet he's fully capable. But you assume, I would say rightly so, you would assume, well, the other characters can talk. But this film has the balls to go its full running time with no dialogue. I mean, really, there are moments where I thought, okay, this other character is going to say something to him, try to have a conversation with him, just give him some information, and it doesn't happen. And that is throughout the entire film. And that is so, man, that is ballsy, it's bold. I don't know if it entirely works because I feel like there are moments where this character would not have been able to get by either without trying to communicate with somebody or having somebody just inadvertently communicate to him, say something to him. There is one moment where his wife tries to console him, and I think she says like, okay, or it's okay, but that's it. And at some point you kind of forget. I mean, there's a point where about halfway through the film, you kind of forget, like nobody has said a word yet. But I think the other thing about this film that it's uneven, if I want to put it that way, is the action. There's a lot of this film that is about him recovering and trying to just cope with the loss of his son and the grief. And before I even get to the action, the relationship with his wife, who I felt like I felt wasn't really handled in the best way. And maybe that's part of the story. That's part of the character, I suppose. But the way, as it's written, that this woman would basically just kind of try and eventually just turn her back and leave this guy who is understandably struggling with a pretty significant tragedy in his life. Who, look, in her defense, he doesn't handle it very well either. He just kind of shuts down and isolates and focuses on getting strong, getting well, and coming up with his plan of how he's going to get back for his son's death. Nobody in this film handles this situation well. And I guess, but that's the license we're taking here in order to kind of drive this movie forward, right? Because otherwise, what happens? He just loses his voice and he tries to go about his life struggling, suffering, grieving, and being traumatized. Okay, that's most people's life. I guess for the sake of this story and for this film, he's going full tilt. He's coming up with a plan. He's going to take it back to him, So I don't know. I felt like the handling of the wife was a little bit of a problem, just because you kind of give the character short shrift by just saying they're really no use at this point, and we just write her out of the story. I don't know. So to the action of the film, though, which I felt like, all right, well, here's where the strength of this film is going to be. This filmmaker is known for this. Let's see some real top tier, just high quality action, choreography, and scenes in this film. And I mean, for most of this, there's a big kind of chase shootout thing at the beginning. There's I guess like a gas station shootout where he buys a car and he rigs it up and it's got like all this bulletproof protection, and he just like dives right in. And the action in this film, I felt like for the most part, it was kind of clumsy. That and some really obvious and sometimes kind of painful use of CGI. I just think we've seen it better in other films in the past. And yet there is a moment in this where we really get what we've been waiting for. There's kind of this working his way up the ladder, up the chain to the big bad guy, the leader of the gang, or the guy that shot him in the throat, right? Part of this film is just him finding that guy. So he's working his way through the ranks, trying to figure out where this guy is, who this guy is, and how he's going to take him out. When we get to that sequence, which is basically like the last, 20 minutes of the film, that's where I feel like, oh, we're getting John Woo now. John Woo finally showed up, because we do get some really well-staged and interesting action sequences. And I'll even say this, props to whoever chose the music for this film, especially that last 30 minutes, because that's where I feel like, oh, here's somebody who's really finding the vibe. Like, this feels like a real, just tough as nails, balls to the wall action film now. And it looks like what I was expecting the whole time. And I think at some point, he kind of just turns into Frank Castle, you know? He kind of becomes impervious to bullet wounds and to knife cuts. And he keeps powering ahead. He keeps pushing on. And, he kind of gets up to invincible status. But I think that's the idea, is this guy's willing to go to the end to get his justice. And so in that respect, all right, I feel like it works, Once we kind of leave reality behind and like we enter this, it's literally entering this building or this space where the bad guys are. I think that's where we see, okay, now it's on. And so it really works in that last 20 to 30 minutes. Before that, I just feel like, man, this is somebody who likes John Woo films trying to make a John Woo film. It just doesn't really, it doesn't really hold together like that last sequence does. And so it's a little bit of a disappointment. I appreciate the idea of John Woo coming back to doing some American films. I think he's going to do I don't know if he's involved with it, but I know there is supposed to be a reboot of The Killer. I'm curious what that's going to look like, I don't know if that's really something that needed to be remade or rebooted, but I'm glad to see that his influence and maybe his involvement is still a thing. So I don't know. Was this really what I expected? Not entirely. And do I expect to see more and better work? Of course. Yes, for sure. I'm glad John Woo is still doing some films. That's the stuff those action films, those are what I kind of came up on, Something like Hard Boiled. It's a film you couldn't find anywhere. I mean, unless you just happen to hit like an obscure video store where you could pick up the tape of it, or you knew somebody who had the tape of it. It was one of those you just couldn't find. And I don't even know if you can find it online, like in any streaming services. So a lot of those films, I feel like, is there a risk of them being lost and their influence being forgotten? Maybe. And so maybe that's why, hey, it's good to have him back in the fold and doing something. And now I got to say, like, Silent Night being so kind of different and kind of experimental, I feel like that's a good thing too. I'm sure another filmmaker could try something like this. Maybe they wouldn't be as successful. Maybe they would be even more successful. I don't know. But just the idea of, like, he didn't just come back with another ho-hum routine action film. He really just at least swung for the fences. He said, I'm really going to try something different. And I'm even curious, like, does that mean a film like this with no actual dialogue, but with a lot of action, does that translate better? Does that work better overseas, because there's no language barrier? I'm curious about that, just in general. And maybe not this film in particular, because I feel like this film does approach and it does try to tackle, like, a very specifically American sort of, I don't know, criminal element. But it's interesting to think, this is a film that is maybe a one of its kind thing. I don't know if anybody would dare to repeat it. This whole no dialogue, all action type of thing, because it's not easy to do. And this film even itself doesn't quite do it. So maybe it's a little bit of a proof of concept. Maybe it's a little bit of like, well, we got some of it right. We couldn't figure out some other parts of it. But at least it's there. It's down in the books now. So I don't know. That's just a few of the latest, I guess, revenge action stories that I've seen lately. And some of them work, some of them don't. But I know there's going to be more coming soon. I guess you could say that's one of the interesting things about the John Wick franchise. It has kind of renewed some interest and maybe forced some people to up their game or try a couple of different things, Because at this point, I don't know if we'll see another John Wick movie. We'll see a spinoff, I think, and we've got the series, which I think is done. It's just a limited series. But the films itself, or at least Keanu Reeves himself, maybe that is all done now. So who kind of picks up the mantle of being the new franchise, the new character, whatever? I don't feel like it's going to be the Beekeeper. I don't feel like it's going to be Monkey Man, because you got to see the film. And Silent Night, it's an experiment, and I think it's best left at that. So there's definitely more out there. There's something else that is going to be in this vein that I think is going to be the next big thing. So I don't know. That's it for now. That's this episode. I wanted to keep it just focused on these films, but I'll come back with some more soon. And hey, if you want to hear some other episodes, you go to filmstreak.com. You can check out those. I've got a list of all these films on IMDb, so you can add them to your list or rate them, review them if you do that. But if anything else, like IMDb connects to other services, so you can see if it's streaming somewhere, any of these films, and watch them, see what you think. And until next time, hey, I'm chilling. I'm in my new recording setup. It's kind of different. It's a little more relaxed, a little more comfortable. And I've got the TV right here in front of me, so I'm going to go watch something new.